Angela Reynolds checked her watch and sighed as the red and blue lights flashed in her rearview mirror. She was already running late for her meeting with the mayor about the community center renovation. After pulling to the side of the road, she rolled down her window and waited, hands visible on the steering wheel just as her father had taught her years ago. 2 officers approached her car, 1 on each side. The taller one, Officer Daniels, according to his nameplate, leaned down to peer through her window. "License and registration," he said flatly, not bothering with a greeting. "Good afternoon, officer," Angela replied politely, reaching slowly for her purse. "May I ask why I was pulled over?" Officer Daniels gave her a look that suggested her question was an annoyance. "You rolled through that stop sign back there." Angela frowned slightly. She was certain she had come to a complete stop. The intersection was one she'd navigated hundreds of times growing up in this neighborhood. "I'm pretty sure I stopped completely, sir," she said, keeping her tone respectful but firm as she handed over her documents. The second officer, who had been standing quietly on the passenger side, let out a small chuckle. "They all say that," he muttered, just loud enough for her to hear. Officer Daniels examined her license, his expression changing slightly as he noticed her Washington, D.C. address. "You're a long way from home." "I grew up here," Angela explained. "I'm back visiting family and have a meeting with the mayor in," she glanced at her watch again, 15 minutes. Both officers exchanged looks, clear disbelief on their faces. The second officer walked around to join his partner. "The mayor, huh?" Officer Daniels said with a hint of mockery in his voice. "Important business?" Angela took a deep breath. She had experienced this kind of treatment before, especially when returning to her hometown where few people knew about her career accomplishments. She had worked hard to get where she was. Law school at night while holding down a full-time job, years climbing the ranks in various government agencies. But right now they weren't seeing any of that. They were seeing only what they wanted to see. "Yes, actually. About the community center on Elm Street," she answered calmly. "It's being renovated and expanded. I helped secure some of the federal funding." The second officer snorted. "Federal funding?" "Sure." Angela felt her patience wearing thin but maintained her composure. This wasn't the time or place for confrontation. Officer Daniels was typing her information into the small computer in their patrol car. After a few minutes, he returned with a ticket. "Here you go. Court date's on there if you want to contest it," he said, his tone suggesting that contesting would be a waste of everyone's time. Angela accepted the ticket, quickly scanning the details. "Thank you, officer. I will be contesting this." As she started her car, she could hear the officers laughing. One of them said something she couldn't quite make out, but the dismissive tone was clear enough. Driving away, Angela called her assistant in Washington to reschedule some meetings for next month. She had just cleared her calendar for the court date. The following weeks were hectic for Angela. Her recent appointment as Secretary of Homeland Security meant endless briefings, meetings with international officials, and crisis management sessions that often ran late into the night. Few people realized the weight of responsibility that came with overseeing a department tasked with keeping the nation safe, from border security to cyber threats and everything in between. Despite her busy schedule, Angela made time to prepare her case. She visited the intersection where she'd been pulled over, taking photos and noting the timing of the traffic light cycle. She also requested the dashcam footage from the police department. Though her request was met with delays and excuses, her younger brother Tony was the only family member who knew about her high-profile position. "Just tell them who you are, Angie," he suggested one evening as they sat on their mother's porch. This would all go away with one phone call. Angela shook her head, sipping her iced tea. "That's not the point, Tony. This isn't about who I am or what position I hold. It's about right and wrong. Those officers were wrong, and the system should work equally for everyone, not just people with titles." Tony leaned back in his chair. "You always were the stubborn one." "Principled," she corrected with a small smile. "There's a difference." The night before her court appearance, Angela finally received the dashcam footage. As she watched it in her mother's living room, a sense of vindication washed over her. The video clearly showed her coming to a complete stop at the intersection, just as she had claimed. Her mother walked in, concerned about the dark circles under her daughter's eyes. "You're working too hard, baby." All this fuss over a ticket? Angela smiled at her mother. It's not just about the ticket, Mom. It's about being treated fairly. She didn't add that it was also about the assumption that she couldn't possibly be meeting with the mayor, that federal funding wasn't something someone like her would know about. Those unspoken biases were exactly why she needed to see this through. That night, as she prepared her professional outfit for court, nothing too fancy but still appropriate, Angela thought about all the young girls from her neighborhood who faced similar assumptions every day. Maybe her small stand wouldn't change the world, but it might change something for someone. That was enough reason to proceed. The next morning dawned clear and bright. Angela drove to the courthouse, rehearsing her points in her head. She had faced down terrorist threats and international crises, but somehow this small-town courtroom made her nervous in a different way. This was personal. As she parked her car and gathered her evidence folder, Angela reminded herself that regardless of the outcome, she was standing up for something important. With that thought firmly in mind, she straightened her shoulders and walked toward the courthouse steps, ready to face whatever came next. In the weeks before her court date, Angela's life was a whirlwind of high-stakes meetings and critical decisions. Her phone buzzed constantly with alerts and messages, each one demanding immediate attention. Being the Secretary of Homeland Security wasn't just a job title, it was a 24/7 commitment to keeping the country safe. Madam Secretary, the President needs your input on the situation in Eastern Europe, her Chief of Staff, Paul, said as he poked his head into her office one morning. And the FBI Director is waiting on line 2 about the cyber threat assessment. Angela nodded, already reaching for the secure phone. Tell the President I'll join the call in 5 minutes. And ask the FBI Director if we can push our discussion to this afternoon. This was her daily reality now, juggling national security threats while trying to maintain some semblance of normal life. Few people outside her immediate circle understood the pressure she faced every day. The weight of making decisions that affected millions of lives had given her a quiet strength, a steady resolve that served her well in crises. Yet amid all this chaos, the unfair traffic ticket from her hometown kept nagging at her. It wasn't just about the fine, it was about principle, about standing up against the small injustices that often went unchallenged. One evening, as she worked late in her D.C. office with the city lights twinkling outside her window, Angela pulled out the ticket from her personal bag. The memory of the officer's dismissive attitude still stung. She had experienced similar treatment before, but this time felt different. Maybe it was because she had come so far in her career, or maybe it was because she was tired of letting such moments slide. Still working on that ticket case? Asked Diane, her longtime assistant who had stuck with her through various government positions over the years. Angela looked up, slightly embarrassed to be caught focusing on something so seemingly small amid national security concerns. I know it seems trivial compared to everything else. Diane shook her head. It's not trivial if it matters to you. And honestly, those officers need a reality check. It's not about embarrassing them, Angela replied, organizing the evidence she'd gathered. It's about fairness. What if this happened to someone without my resources or knowledge of the system? Most people would just pay the fine, even if they were innocent. The next day, Angela cleared a few hours in her packed schedule to practice her presentation for court. She wanted to be prepared but not come across as intimidating. This was a delicate balance, being assertive without seeming like she was flaunting her position. She called her brother Tony for advice. How do I do this without making it about my job? She asked. Just be yourself, Angie, Tony suggested. The you before all the fancy titles. Remember how you used to argue with me when we were kids? You always had a way of making your point without raising your voice. Angela laughed at the memory. You were just easy to beat in arguments. Maybe, Tony admitted. But seriously, you've always had this quiet strength. Use that. You don't need to mention your job unless it comes up directly. As the court date approached, Angela found herself increasingly focused on the case despite the constant national security briefings that demanded her attention. She had obtained the dashcam footage which clearly showed her making a complete stop at the intersection. She had also taken photos of the stop sign, showing it was partially obscured by overgrown branches. Something the city should have addressed. 3 days before the hearing, a major security threat emerged involving a potential attack on transportation infrastructure. Angela spent 48 hours straight coordinating with various agencies, sleeping only in short naps on the office couch. By the time the threat was neutralized, she was exhausted. You should postpone the court appearance, Paul suggested as they debriefed after the crisis. No one would blame you given what we've just been through. Angela shook her head firmly. No, this matters too. I've already arranged for Deputy Secretary Wilson to handle things for the day. The night before her court date, Angela flew back to her hometown on a small government jet, not for show, but because it was the only way to make it on time given her responsibilities. As the plane descended, she looked out at the familiar landscape below, the river winding through the town center, the high school football field where she'd spent Friday nights cheering with friends, the neighborhood where she'd grown up dreaming of making a difference in the world. She smiled at the thought of how her younger self would react to knowing she'd become Secretary of Homeland Security. That girl who was always told she was too ambitious or too outspoken had proven everyone wrong, step by determined step. Her mother picked her up from the small regional airport, fussing over her immediately. You look tired, baby, she said, pulling Angela into a tight hug. Are you eating properly?
Getting enough sleep?
Angela laughed. I'm fine, Mom, just busy. Back at her childhood home, Angela laid out her clothes for court, a simple navy blue pantsuit, professional but not ostentatious. Her mother watched from the doorway. I'm proud of you, she said quietly. Not because of your big job, though that's amazing too. I'm proud because you still care about the little things, the right things. Angela felt a lump in her throat. Her mother had raised her and Tony alone after their father died, working 2 jobs to make ends meet. She had taught them that integrity mattered above all else. I learned from the best, Angela replied, hugging her mother. Later that night, as she reviewed her notes one last time, Angela received a call from the White House. A situation was developing in Asia that might require her attention. She spent an hour on a secure line, giving directions to her team before returning to her court preparations. This was her life now. Constant interruptions, weighty responsibilities, and the knowledge that every decision she made could have far-reaching consequences. Yet here she was, about to appear in traffic court over a minor citation because she believed in standing up for what was right, regardless of scale. As she finally went to bed, Angela set 2 alarms to ensure she wouldn't oversleep. Tomorrow would be interesting, to say the least. Part of her wondered how those officers would react when they realized who she was, not to inflate her own importance, but because the contrast between their assumptions and reality was so stark. Before drifting off to sleep, Angela reminded herself of her goal, to present her case clearly and respectfully, to challenge the unfair citation without making it personal, and perhaps to make those officers think twice before making assumptions in the future. The morning dawned crisp and clear. Angela woke feeling surprisingly rested despite everything. As she dressed and prepared her evidence folder, she felt a sense of calm purpose. This small courtroom battle was, in its own way, just as important as the national security decisions she made every day. Both were about protecting what mattered, be it the safety of a nation or the principle of equal treatment under the law. Ready? Her mother asked as Angela came downstairs. Angela nodded, tucking her folder under her arm. As I'll ever be. Together they headed to the courthouse, ready to face what would surely be an interesting morning in court. The county courthouse stood in the center of town, a solid brick building with wide steps leading to heavy wooden doors. Angela had passed by it countless times growing up, but had never actually been inside. As she and her mother climbed the steps, Angela felt a flutter of nervousness in her stomach. Not the kind she experienced before briefing the president, but something more personal. You'll do fine, her mother whispered, giving her hand a quick squeeze before they entered. Inside, the building was cooler than the warm spring morning outside. Their footsteps echoed on the polished floor as they followed the signs to the traffic court. Several people already sat on wooden benches in the courtroom, some looking bored, others anxious. Angela and her mother found seats near the back. Angela scanned the room, immediately spotting Officers Daniels and Thompson. She had learned the second officer's name from the ticket, standing near the front, chatting casually with the court clerk. Officer Daniels laughed at something, his voice carrying across the quiet room. When he turned slightly, his eyes briefly met Angela's, but there was no recognition in them. Just a passing glance before he returned to his conversation. That's them? Her mother whispered. Angela nodded, opening her folder to review her evidence one last time. The dashcam footage was clear. She had made a complete stop at the intersection. She also had photos showing how the stop sign was partially hidden by overgrown branches, though that was secondary since she had stopped anyway. At exactly 9:30, a side door opened and everyone rose as the judge entered. Judge Patterson was an older man with silver hair and reading glasses perched on the end of his nose. He moved with deliberate steps to his seat and gestured for everyone to sit down. "Good morning, folks," he said, his voice firm but not unkind. "Let's try to move through today's cases efficiently. When your name is called, please step forward." Angela watched as several cases were handled quickly. Most people simply pleaded guilty and paid their fines, eager to get on with their day. A few contested their tickets but did so with little preparation, mostly just their word against the officers. When the clerk finally called Angela Reynolds, she stood smoothly, straightened her navy blue blazer, and walked to the front of the courtroom with measured steps. Her mother gave her an encouraging nod. As Angela approached the small podium facing the judge, she noticed Officer Daniels straighten up, a flicker of recognition crossing his face as he remembered the traffic stop. Next to him, Officer Thompson leaned over and whispered something, causing both men to share a small smile. "Ms. Reynolds," Judge Patterson began, looking down at the paperwork before him. "You're contesting a citation for failing to stop at a stop sign on Elm Street. How do you plead?" "Not guilty, Your Honor," Angela replied clearly, placing her folder on the podium. The judge nodded. "Officer Daniels, please present your account of the incident." Officer Daniels stepped forward confidently. "Your Honor, on April 3rd at approximately 2:15 p.m., I observed the defendant's vehicle approach the stop sign at Elm in Washington. The vehicle slowed but did not come to a complete stop before proceeding through the intersection. I initiated a traffic stop and issued a citation for failure to stop." "Thank you, officer," the judge said, then turned to Angela. "Ms. Reynolds, your response?" Angela took a deep breath. "Your Honor, I respectfully disagree with Officer Daniels' account. I did come to a complete stop at that intersection, as I always do. I have evidence to support this." From the corner of her eye, she saw Officer Thompson roll his eyes slightly. Officer Daniels shifted his weight, crossing his arms with a look that suggested he'd heard this all before. "I'd like to present the dashcam footage from the police vehicle," Angela continued, her voice steady. "It clearly shows my car coming to a complete stop." This caught the officer's attention. Most people didn't know they could request dashcam footage, and fewer still actually did so. Judge Patterson raised an eyebrow. "You've obtained the dashcam footage?" "Yes, Your Honor," Angela replied, producing a USB drive and the necessary paperwork showing she had legally obtained the evidence. "I requested it through proper channels 2 weeks ago." The judge looked slightly impressed and nodded to the court clerk, who took the USB drive to a computer, connected to a small screen visible to the judge. After a moment, the footage began to play. The courtroom was silent as they watched Angela's car approach the stop sign, brake lights clearly visible, and come to a definite stop before proceeding. Officer Daniels' expression tightened as he watched, while Officer Thompson uncrossed his arms, his confident posture faltering. Once the video finished, Angela spoke again. "As you can see, Your Honor, my vehicle did come to a complete stop. Additionally, I'd like to point out that the stop sign at this intersection is partially obscured by foliage." She produced several photographs showing the stop sign partially hidden by tree branches. Judge Patterson examined the photos, then looked at Officer Daniels. "Officer, your response to this evidence?" Officer Daniels cleared his throat. "From my angle, Your Honor, it appeared the vehicle rolled through. The video perspective might be different from what I observed." One of the officers behind them whispered something to his colleague, and a muffled laugh followed. Angela kept her focus on the judge, ignoring the disrespect. "Ms. Reynolds," Judge Patterson said, studying her more carefully now, "what brings you to our town? Your license shows a Washington, D.C. address." "I grew up here, Your Honor," Angela explained. "I was back visiting family and had a meeting scheduled with Mayor Bennett about the community center renovation project." At this, Officer Thompson leaned over to Officer Daniels and whispered something that made both men smirk. The judge noticed this too and frowned slightly. "And what exactly do you do in Washington that would connect you to our local community center project?" the judge asked, sounding genuinely curious rather than skeptical. This was the moment Angela had anticipated. She didn't want to use her position to influence the case. The evidence should speak for itself. But the question had been asked directly. "I work for the federal government." "Your Honor," she replied simply. Officer Daniels made a small scoffing sound. Judge Patterson noticed and gave him a sharp look before turning back to Angela. "In what capacity, Ms. Reynolds?" he pressed. Angela straightened her shoulders slightly. "I serve as the Secretary of Homeland Security, Your Honor." The words hung in the air for a moment. A complete silence fell over the courtroom. Judge Patterson's eyebrows shot up, and he peered at her more intently over his reading glasses. Officer Daniels's mouth literally dropped open. Officer Thompson, who had been leaning against the wall with an air of casual indifference, suddenly stood up straight, his face a mask of shock. A few spectators in the courtroom began to whisper to each other. Angela's mother sat a little straighter in her seat, a small, proud smile on her face. "I see," Judge Patterson said finally. "That would indeed explain your interest in federal funding for local projects." "Yes, Your Honor," Angela replied evenly. "But my position isn't relevant to this case. The evidence speaks for itself." Judge Patterson nodded, a hint of respect in his eyes. "Indeed it does, Ms. Reynolds." He turned to the officers whose expressions were still frozen in shock. "Officers, do you have anything further to add?" Officer Daniels, usually so confident, now looked deeply uncomfortable. "No, Your Honor," he managed to say, his voice notably less assured than before. Angela could feel the officer's eyes on her now, reassessing everything about her. The laughing and whispering had completely stopped. She kept her gaze forward, focused on the judge, maintaining her composure. As Judge Patterson reviewed the evidence one more time, Angela reflected on how quickly perceptions could change. Just minutes ago, these officers had seen her as just another person trying to get out of a ticket, someone they could dismiss with knowing looks and whispered comments. Now they stood rigid, probably mentally replaying their entire interaction with her during the traffic stop. But Angela hadn't contested this ticket to embarrass anyone or to flex her position. She had done it because it was right, because the system should work properly for everyone, not just those with titles or power. The fact that she happened to have such a title only highlighted the problem. What about all the people who didn't? Her thoughts were interrupted as Judge Patterson cleared his throat, ready to deliver his verdict. The courtroom remained unusually quiet as Judge Patterson reviewed the evidence one final time. The once confident officers Daniels and Thompson now stood completely still, their earlier casual demeanor replaced by rigid postures. Several people in the audience were stealing glances at Angela, trying to reconcile the composed woman in the simple navy suit with the high-ranking government official she had just revealed herself to be. "Madam Secretary," Judge Patterson said finally, removing his reading glasses and addressing Angela with a formality that hadn't been there moments before. "I want to verify, you are indeed the current Secretary of Homeland Security?" "Yes, Your Honor," Angela replied simply, neither pride nor apology in her voice. She didn't want special treatment. She just wanted fairness. The judge nodded thoughtfully. "I believe this is the first time a cabinet member has appeared in my courtroom." A hint of a smile crossed his face before he turned serious again. "However, your position, impressive as it is, has no bearing on this case. The evidence is what matters here." "I couldn't agree more, Your Honor," Angela said, feeling a small surge of respect for the judge. Judge Patterson turned to the officers. "Officer Daniels, the dashcam footage clearly shows Ms. Reynolds' vehicle coming to a complete stop at the intersection in question. Would you care to amend your testimony?" Officer Daniels looked like he wanted to sink into the floor. His face had drained of color and he kept swallowing nervously. "Your Honor, from my angle, I believed the vehicle rolled through the stop, but I accept that the video evidence suggests otherwise." Officer Thompson was staring at Angela with a mixture of disbelief and embarrassment. The same man who had smirked and whispered jokes now looked like he was mentally calculating how this encounter might affect his career. "Very well," Judge Patterson said, turning back to Angela. "Ms. Reynolds, the evidence you've presented contradicts the citation you were issued. Based on the dashcam footage, it's clear your vehicle did come to a complete stop as required by law." He made a note in the file before continuing. "Additionally, your photographs showing the partially obscured stop sign are concerning. I'll be notifying the city's maintenance department about that issue today." Angela nodded gratefully. This wasn't just about her ticket anymore. It was about making sure no one else would be unfairly cited because of that poorly maintained sign. Given the evidence presented, I am dismissing this citation, Judge Patterson announced, striking his gavel lightly on the bench. Case dismissed. A wave of whispers spread through the courtroom. Angela thanked the judge and gathered her documents. As she turned to leave, she noticed Officer Daniels and Officer Thompson exchanging panicked looks. The realization of who they had pulled over and how they had treated her was clearly sinking in. "Madam Secretary," Officer Daniels called out as Angela walked past them toward her mother. His voice was much more respectful now, almost nervous. "May we have a word with you before you leave?" Angela paused, considering for a moment. She could simply walk away. She had won her case after all. But something told her this conversation might actually matter. "Of course," she replied, then turned to her mother. "Mom, would you mind waiting for me outside?" "This won't take long," her mother nodded, giving the officers a look that only a protective parent could deliver before heading to the corridor. Angela followed the officers to a small conference room just off the main courtroom. Officer Thompson closed the door behind them, then stood awkwardly, as if unsure whether to sit or remain standing in her presence. "Please, let's sit," Angela said, gesturing to the chairs around the small table. She took a seat and placed her folder neatly in front of her. Both officers sat down, looking extremely uncomfortable. Officer Daniels cleared his throat twice before finally speaking. "Madam Secretary, I want to apologize for how we conducted ourselves during your traffic stop and here in court today." He couldn't quite meet her eyes as he spoke. "Had we known who you were," Angela held up a hand, stopping him mid-sentence. "That's exactly the problem, Officer Daniels. How you treat me shouldn't depend on my job title." Officer Thompson shifted in his seat. "We didn't mean any disrespect." "But that's just it," Angela said, leaning forward slightly. The laughing, the whispering, the dismissive attitude, all of that was disrespectful. And it happened before you knew my position. Both officers looked down at the table. "I grew up in this town," Angela continued, her voice firm but not angry. "I shopped at the same stores you probably shop at. My mother still lives in the same house where I was raised. I was ordinary in every way until life and hard work took me somewhere unexpected." She paused, letting her words sink in. "The woman you pulled over that day wasn't the Secretary of Homeland Security. She was just Angela Reynolds, coming home to visit her mom and help her community." Officer Daniels nodded slowly. "You're right. We made assumptions and they were wrong. We see so many people trying to talk their way out of tickets," Officer Thompson added. "After a while you start to categorize people," Angela suggested. "See what you expect to see?" "Yes, ma'am," he admitted. Angela's expression softened slightly. "I understand that your job is difficult. You deal with people who lie to you every day. You make split-second decisions that can be life or death. I respect that tremendously." Both officers looked surprised at her understanding tone. "But," she continued, "those challenges make it even more important to approach each person with an open mind. The woman you pulled over could have been a teacher, a nurse, a business owner, or yes, even a cabinet member. The point is, you wouldn't know unless you truly looked." Officer Daniels nodded, something shifting in his expression. "I've never thought about it quite that way." "May I ask you something?" Angela said. When they nodded, she continued. "When I told you I was meeting with the mayor about federal funding for the community center, why didn't you believe me?" The officers exchanged uncomfortable glances. "Be honest," Angela encouraged them. "This isn't about getting anyone in trouble. It's about understanding." Officer Thompson sighed. "You didn't look the part, I guess. You were just so normal." "And what does someone who works with mayors and federal funding look like?" Angela asked, genuine curiosity in her voice. Neither officer had an answer for that. "I've sat in the Situation Room with the president," Angela said quietly. "I've briefed Congress on national security threats. I've negotiated with world leaders. And do you know what? Most days I still feel like that girl who grew up on Maple Street, whose mother worked 2 jobs to put food on the table." She leaned back in her chair. "We all have assumptions. The key is recognizing them and not letting them cloud our judgment, especially when you wear that badge." Officer Daniels nodded slowly. "I appreciate you taking the time to talk with us, Madam Secretary. Most people in your position wouldn't have bothered. Most people in my position were never pulled over for something they didn't do." Angela replied with a small smile. Or if they were, they probably just paid the ticket because it was easier. We really are sorry, Officer Thompson said, and this time it sounded sincere. Angela stood, signaling that the conversation was coming to an end. I didn't contest this ticket to embarrass anyone or to get an apology. I did it because it was the right thing to do. Just like doing your job fairly is the right thing to do, for everyone, not just people with titles. As they all walked toward the door, Officer Daniels hesitated. Madam Secretary, if you don't mind my asking, how did you go from here to, well, there? Angela paused, her hand on the doorknob. One step at a time, officer. And a lot of people who saw me for who I was, not who they assumed I was. She opened the door, including a few good police officers who took the time to really see the people they served. With that, she walked out into the corridor where her mother was waiting. Behind her, the officer stood a little straighter, watching as the Secretary of Homeland Security, who was also just Angela Reynolds from Maple Street, walked away with her arm linked through her mother's. How did it go? Her mother asked. I think, Angela said thoughtfully, it went exactly as it needed to. As they pushed through the courthouse doors into the bright sunlight, Angela knew this small moment of justice might not change the world. But perhaps it had changed something in that conference room, and sometimes that was enough to start making a difference. The bright midday sun warmed Angela's face as she and her mother descended the courthouse steps. A few curious onlookers, people who had been in the courtroom and witnessed the revelation, stole glances at them as they passed. Angela was used to being recognized in Washington, but here in her hometown it felt different, almost surreal. You hungry? Her mother asked, linking her arm through Angela's. I made your favorite potato salad last night. Angela smiled, grateful for her mother's grounding presence. Starving, actually. Let's go home. As they walked toward her mother's car, Angela's phone buzzed in her pocket. She checked it quickly. A message from her deputy about an emerging situation that needed her attention later that day. The real world was calling, as it always did. Everything okay? Her mother asked, noticing Angela's expression change. Just work. Nothing that can't wait an hour, Angela replied, tucking the phone away. These moments with her mother were precious, especially now when her life moved at such a frantic pace. When they arrived home, Angela kicked off her shoes and helped set the table while her mother prepared lunch. The familiar routine felt comforting, so different from her high-pressure days in Washington where even meals were often working affairs, squeezed between crisis briefings and policy meetings. So, her mother said as they sat down to eat, you made quite an impression today. Angela speared a piece of cucumber from her salad. That wasn't my intention. I know it wasn't, her mother replied with a knowing smile. But sometimes the most powerful lessons come when we're just being ourselves. They ate in comfortable silence for a few minutes before her mother spoke again. You know, your father would have been so proud today, not because of your fancy title, but because you stood up for what was right. Angela felt a familiar ache at the mention of her father, gone now for 15 years. He taught me that, she said softly. Remember how he always said, it's not about winning, it's about standing on the side of truth? Her mother nodded, her eyes growing misty. He certainly did, and he practiced it every day of his life. After lunch, Angela reluctantly checked her messages and made a few necessary calls. She would need to leave for the airport sooner than planned. Such was the nature of her position. Even small crises required her attention, and this one involved a potential security breach at a major port that couldn't wait. Duty calls? Her mother asked when Angela emerged from the bedroom where she'd taken the calls. Unfortunately, yes. I need to head back this afternoon instead of tomorrow. Angela sat beside her mother on the worn living room sofa. I'm sorry, Mom. I know we were supposed to have dinner with Tony and the kids tonight. Her mother patted her hand. We understand, baby. That's the job you signed up for. As Angela packed her overnight bag, her phone rang again. This time it wasn't her deputy or anyone from her department. It was Mayor Bennett, Madam Secretary, he began, sounding both formal and slightly flustered. I've just heard about what happened at the courthouse this morning. News traveled fast in small towns. Angela wasn't surprised. Call me Angela, please, she said, tucking the phone between her ear and shoulder as she continued packing. We've known each other since high school, Ted. The mayor laughed, sounding relieved. Right, of course, Angela. Listen, I wanted to apologize for what happened with those officers. That's not how we want visitors to our town treated, especially someone who's done so much for us with the community center project. It's all resolved now, Angela assured him, and honestly it led to what I think was a meaningful conversation with those officers. Still, Mayor Bennett continued, I've scheduled a meeting with the police chief tomorrow. Not to get anyone in trouble, he added quickly, but to talk about some additional training I think our department could benefit from. Angela paused in her packing. What kind of training? Well, that's partly why I'm calling, the mayor admitted. I was hoping you might have some recommendations from the federal level. Programs that address, well, bias in policing? Angela suggested when he seemed to struggle for the right words. Exactly, he said, sounding relieved that she'd named it directly. Angela sat on the edge of the bed, giving the conversation her full attention now. Actually, I do have some thoughts on that. There's a community policing initiative that's shown great results in several cities. It focuses on building relationships between officers and the communities they serve, with specific training on recognizing unconscious bias. The mayor sounded genuinely interested. That sounds exactly like what we need. By the time the call ended 20 minutes later, Angela had promised to send information about the program and to connect the mayor with colleagues who could help implement it. What had started as a simple traffic ticket was evolving into something much more significant. As she finished packing and prepared to leave for the airport, Angela's phone buzzed again with a text from an unknown local number. Madam Secretary, this is Officer Daniels. Hope it's okay that I got your number from Mayor Bennett. Just wanted to say thank you for the conversation today. It's given me a lot to think about. Safe travels back to D.C. Angela smiled and texted back a simple, "Thank you, Officer Daniels. I appreciate your openness to our conversation." On the drive to the airport, Angela's mother asked about her shortened visit. "Will you be able to come back for the community center opening next month?" "I'll make it work," Angela promised. This project means too much to miss the ribbon cutting. The community center renovation included a new library wing named after her father, who had taught at the local high school for 30 years before his death. It was a fitting tribute to a man who had believed so deeply in education and community service. As they pulled up to the small regional airport where a government plane waited, her mother turned to her with a serious expression. "You know, Angela, what happened today in that courtroom and afterward? That might be more important than all the high-level meetings you have in Washington." Angela raised an eyebrow. "How so?" "Because it was real. It was human. Those officers saw you as a person today, not just as someone they could dismiss. And you saw them as people too, not just as officers who had wronged you." Her mother squeezed her hand. That kind of connection, that's what actually changes things. Angela considered her mother's words as she hugged her goodbye and walked toward the waiting plane. Perhaps her mother was right. In Washington, change often meant massive policy initiatives, executive orders, and legislation affecting millions. But sometimes, real change happened in small conference rooms with 2 police officers and a conversation that made everyone see things a little differently. 6 months later, Angela stood at a podium outside the newly renovated community center. The autumn air was crisp, and colorful leaves drifted down around the gathered crowd as she prepared to cut the ribbon. Mayor Bennett stood beside her, along with various local officials and community members. What surprised her most, however, was seeing Officers Daniels and Thompson standing near the front of the crowd. They nodded respectfully when they caught her eye. After the ceremony, as people mingled and explored the new facility, Officer Daniels approached her. "Madam Secretary, I wanted to thank you," he said, his manner much different from their first encounter. "The program you recommended to the mayor, we've all gone through it now." "And?" Angela prompted. "It's changed things," he admitted.
Changed how we approach our work, how we see the people we interact with every day. Officer Thompson joined them, adding, "We've started a community outreach program too."
"Weekly coffee meetings at local shops where people can talk to officers in a relaxed setting." Angela smiled. "That sounds wonderful." "It was actually inspired by our conversation with you," Officer Daniels explained. "You treated us with respect that day, even after how we'd acted. It made us think about how we treat others." As Angela flew back to Washington that evening, she thought about the ripple effects of that one traffic stop. What had begun as an unfair citation had sparked a small but meaningful change in her hometown police department. The community outreach program was connecting officers with residents in ways that built understanding and trust on both sides. Her deputy met her at Andrews Air Force Base, already briefing her on the day's developments before she'd even entered the car. There was always another crisis, another threat, another decision needing her attention. That was the nature of her job, constantly putting out fires and trying to prevent new ones from igniting. But as they drove through the darkness toward the Capitol, Angela found herself thinking about her mother's words that day months ago. The high-level national security work was vital, of course, but sometimes the most profound changes began with small moments of human connection. A conversation in a courthouse conference room, a willingness to see beyond assumptions, the courage to stand up for what was right even in small matters. That night, after handling the day's urgent issues, Angela sat at her desk and drafted a memo about a new initiative, one that would connect federal law enforcement agencies more closely with local departments, sharing training resources specifically focused on community relationships and bias recognition. She titled it, the Hometown Connection Initiative. Sometimes, she reflected as she worked late into the night, the most valuable lessons came from the most unexpected places. Even a routine traffic stop in a small-town courthouse, where a cabinet secretary had once been just Angela Reynolds from Maple Street, standing up for what was right.